So I began to think, how do we really use generative AI? And in fact, at that time, I knew AI agents were going to become a thing. And I began to think about the use cases where you could think about augmenting your workforce with AI labor and truly using generative AI, because I realized it would require stepping outside the box. It required thinking outside of the way manufacturing and wholesale distribution has thought for the last 2 decades.
Welcome to the IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Peter Rode-Chen, CEO of Tolin Tech SAP and Cloud Services here in Shanghai. Today, we are joined by Sahitya Senapathy, a remarkable 22-year-old founder and CEO of Endeavor. Born in Michigan, Sahitya grew up surrounded by the automotive industry, which inspired his mission to revitalize American manufacturing. With a background in AI initiatives at AWS and Palantir, Sahitya founded Endeavor out of his college dorm room. Recently, Endeavor secured $7 million in funding from top VCs like Kraft Ventures to scale its AI platform, which automates workflows across sales, supply chain, and inventory for factories. So let's dive into how Sahitya and Endeavor are transforming the manufacturing landscape with cutting-edge technology.
Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Sahitya, would you mind giving a brief introduction about yourself for the audience?
Yeah, happy to. Peter, thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it and happy to do a quick intro. My quick background is, like you mentioned, I grew up around the automotive industry. I was born in Michigan. My parents worked in automotive. They were lifers at Ford, Chrysler, GM. And instead of going to daycare after school, I'd go to the IT department where my parents would work at Ford, and you could imagine there's a toddler, little me, just running around. And maybe through osmosis, just being surrounded by all the programming that was going on at the manufacturing plant, I became very interested in computer science. It was coding since I was a kid. And, by the time I was 11, I found myself programming at the level of most college students. And so one time when I noticed that in newspaper, FEMA, was having some troubles with managing the response, I decided to cold email the chief of FEMA at the time and let him know that an 11-year-old could help him with building an app for him. And for some reason, they decided to take a chance on me. And when I was 11, I helped build an app for FEMA that they ended up using in field testing. And I like to joke that once one government agency finds out about you, the rest of them do too. The gentleman at FEMA introduced me to the US Army, which funded my education for the next 3 to 4 years. And by the time I was 16, found myself at the Air Force, at Kirtland Air Force Base, instead of in high school. I was working on autonomous drones there, deep reinforcement learning, working on, the cutting edge AI technology of the day. And it was an amazing experience. But around the time I was 18, I decided, hey, maybe I want a girlfriend. And I decided to go to college. I went to college, which was an amazing experience. I studied a bunch of things from business to computer science to AI. By the time I graduated, I was at a company called Palantir, where I was doing things in the manufacturing space, and ultimately decided, going around the country to these warehouses and factories and facilities, that I loved the space so much, I wanted to go do something myself. And so, took the leap of faith and founded Endeavor, and here we are.
Sahitya, that was an awesome introduction. Thanks a lot. And it basically already answers at least partly the first question I had for you, because I wanted to ask you whether you could share more about your early experience in the manufacturing sector and how that influenced your decision to start Endeavor. Is there anything you would like to add from your perspective?
Totally. What I can go into a bit deeper in terms of, why I decided to found Endeavor rather than going and working at a manufacturer myself or staying at Palantir was because I'd go around the country to these Fortune 500, large enterprise manufacturers or wholesalers. And, we'd be thinking about AI And this was, I think, 2022 or 2023. And this is the boom of generative AI, the foundation. We had the Cambrian explosion of all these models. And instead of thinking about how do we use large language models, it just seemed like AI had become the new thing. And people were just saying things that we had for the last 10, 20 years, like deep learning or inventory forecasting or computer vision, were the same as generative AI. And you and I know that that's not actually generative AI. We've had computer vision, we've had deep learning and forecasting for the last 10, 20 years. And so the same projects that you and I have seen get investment, like demand forecasting, like inventory planning, like transportation networks, we're getting massive amounts of funding, 10, 20, $40 million contracts, but fundamentally nothing had changed in the technology. And so I was like, hey, why are we doing these really big contracts? And we're getting paid more, but we're not able to drive any better results than we were yesterday. So I began to think, how do we really use generative AI? And in fact, at that time, I knew AI agents were going to become a thing. And I began to think about the use cases where you could think about augmenting your workforce with AI labor and truly using generative AI, because I realized it would require stepping outside the box. It required thinking outside of the way manufacturing and wholesale distribution has thought for the last 2 decades.
Cool. Yeah. So this is basically also what actually then motivated you to start Endeavor, right? So how did your experience at Palantir and AWS contribute to your vision for the company?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you when I was at AWS, what I was working on was how do we build code generating large language models? This was way back when, ChatGPT hadn't even come out. I was working on large language models before most people were even knew about ChatGPT. And the reality was I was scared when I first saw it, right? I was talking to this model and it was like I was talking to another person on the other end. So going into, 2022 and 2023, I knew, the world was going to change because here was a thing that felt like artificial general intelligence. Here was something that was smarter than I was at coding, right? I only knew how to do Python, Java, and Rust. And this thing knew every single programming language and it knew it better than I did. And I didn't even know how good these things would really get. When I went to Palantir and we would do these projects for measuring things like overall equipment effectiveness or doing inventory forecasting, downtime and maintenance prediction, I was like, this is great, right? This is fine, but it's not truly groundbreaking. There's nothing here, that's leveraging generative AI technology to really, push the boundaries of what's possible. And so what motivated me was saying, how do we think of ways to bring generative AI? And frankly, the way it came about was I decided to actually just go work at a factory for 3 months. And that's what I did. I worked at a steel factory and I was doing all sorts of things, including being on the shop floor, looking at the purchasing department and calling up people to buy raw materials. I was in the inside sales department looking at quotes and orders and figuring out how to price things, right? I was doing all sorts of cool stuff around the factory. And, I was the odd one out, right? I was the only guy under 30 years old and, who wasn't from the industry. But I learned a ton to the point where I realized the changes aren't going to come through these, massive forecasting projects. Generative AI is not going to help with that, nor is generative AI going to help with robotics and automation on the floor. What it will help with was the back office and the front office and automating the highly labor-intensive processes in most of these factories, especially at enterprise scale.
Okay, so how does Endeavor's platform specifically address those challenges faced by the traditional manufacturing industries?
When we look at our clients, many of whom are really large enterprises, often public or, privately held, but, doing several billions in top line or turnover, the big thing is they're often dealing with very bloated back office or front office departments, right? And what do I mean by bloated? I mean, they've just got a ton of people. And the reality is that there's a lot of manual work, right? You've got people doing manual things and you've got people waiting for other people to do manual things, right? So for example, if we look at supplier onboarding, very common workflow, right? You need to bring on a new supplier, whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor, and we're talking about your raw materials or products. I mean, the process could look like you need to have them do compliance. You need to have the supplier fill out some forms. You need to look at some documents. You need to have someone internally go fill something out and send it to R&D, who then goes and sends it to the product information management group, who then goes and sends it to the inside sales department to set up a customer relationship. And you can imagine you have a chain of these processes that need to happen. One person waiting for the other person, waiting for the other person, waiting for the other person. And before you know it, a process that should take a day has now taken 3 months. And the impact is that you're not able to drive enough revenue, right? You're not able to sell the products that you want. Your suppliers are incredibly frustrated because it's taking so long to get up to date in your system. You're not utilizing your ERP system correctly. So, it's extremely costly. And it's taking up resources from your labor, right? You're hiring high value people to be on the phone with the customer, not doing data entry into SAP or Oracle. And this is ultimately what happens. And you'll get this more than any other person. So many people just doing data entry into the ERP system nowadays. So I answered the problem that we talked about. Now, where I would say, our platform fits in is all the problems that I've mentioned, right? The back and forth transactional communication, the manual document processing, information processing of voicemails and emails and phone calls, the back and forth that occurs when someone needs to reference data in an ERP system, perform various lookups and calculations, and the data entry aspect of porting things into supplier portals and customer portals and into the ERP system itself. All of these, we place under this whole bucket where today modern generative AI technology, and in particular agentic technology, enables the full automation of these class of medium complexity problems, right? Historically, when companies have bought software, it has been for low complexity problems where you could apply an order to cash solution inside of SAP or a procure to pay solution inside of Oracle. What would happen is that you would have software that comes in and can automate fairly easy processes like filling out a form. However, the problem that results from that is the medium complexity still requires a person to exist in the company, and they are working with the software as a service to perform the task. We are now moving to a paradigm where the agent can independently perform that task and interact with the various software as a service systems, so the SAP, the Oracles, the customer portals, and do the manual workflows that the person is doing. And that's fundamentally what we're doing, which is bringing AI labor and AI workforce, you could think about it, to many manufacturers and wholesalers.
Cool. Okay, I'm getting a sense of it. All right, that's really cool. So looking at the foundation, right? So what are your plans for using the $7 million US funding you have received? So how do you see Endeavor expanding its operations in the coming year?
It's a great question because right now, when we look at all sorts of industries, there's been such a great explosion of funding towards trying new innovative things in manufacturing, but also in healthcare and in finance and in legal. And in particular, when we look at those other industries like healthcare and finance and legal, you have really large startups that have raised hundreds of millions of dollars. But in manufacturing and in wholesale distribution, we don't really have that. We don't have, giant companies that have raised hundreds of millions for the pure purpose of bringing agentic technology. And the reality is it's because largely, the attitude that, that makes sense that most people have is, I'll just wait a couple years for my ERP system to roll out AI agents. However, what we are seeing is that there's an adoption curve. The same way, hundreds of people lined outside Apple's first launch for the iPhone, we had early adopters. We are seeing something very similar where we work with transformative CIOs, CTOs or digital transformation folks who want a seat at the table. They want to change the business and they don't want to be doing technology for technology's sake. And what we are seeing is unprecedented demand for new technology. And the last time most of these guys have procured new software has been their ERP system. But for the first time, they are ready to try something new like our agentic platform. To us, that gives us the confidence that we're going to go invest the $7 million in becoming the generation-defining company in the manufacturing space of the 2020s. Right? We want to go build, the next Oracle SAPs that are going to be defining companies that will last in this space for the next several decades. That in 30, 40 years, we'll look back and we'll see, most of the Fortune 500 industrial firms use Endeavor for their call centers, for their inside sales departments, for their finance departments, for their supply chain departments. And that's fundamentally the goal, which is really built towards owning market leadership here.
Cool.
If you're still listening, then you must take technology seriously. So I'd like to introduce you to our case study database. Think of it as a roadmap that can help you understand which use cases and technologies are being deployed in the world today. We have cataloged more than 9,000 case studies and are adding 500 per month with detailed tagging by industry and function. Our goal is to help you make better investment decisions that are backed by data. Check it out at the link below, and please share your thoughts. We'd love to hear how we can improve it. Thank you, and back to the show.
So looking at the vision, how do you see Endeavor contributing in the broader revitalization of manufacturing in the US? And what role do you see AI playing in this process in a broader sense?
As of, I think yesterday or the day before, new tariffs went in. The new administration has, definitely put forward a willingness to implement tariffs. And broadly, it seems like the culture and environment and largely governmental attitude here as well has been focused on reindustrialization. We want more activity in the United States after, decades of outsourcing. And I'm not going to take a political stance about that. But what I will say is that there's going to be more manufacturing plants being built here. Right? You're going to have new semiconductor activity. You're going to have new automotive activity.
Yeah.
And what we see is that a lot of these are new businesses that need to be built up, and there's just not enough people to hire for them. There's just not enough people who can fill in for the labor because of the amount of retirements. Right? The American industry has faced this wave of retirements. They call it silver tsunami. And folks have come into the industry and stayed for decades, and now they're leaving the industry, largely hastened because of COVID and just age. But as we build more factories, we'll need people to fill in. When we're lacking labor, the answer becomes very clear, right? We'll need AI. We'll need AI workers and AI labor to work at these factories that are being built. But we want them doing things that really no one wants to do and no one wants to be hired for, like the order processing, like the supplier onboarding, and like the accounts payable and the invoices and the deductions and so on, the manual workflow that we were talking about. So that's our vision for how we can help with the mission, the broader collective idea of reindustrializing America.
Yeah. Have you faced challenges? I mean, traditional manufacturing, it's not always that open to latest tech. So what kind of challenges did you face?
Oh, certainly. Lots of challenges, I think, both culturally and technically, right? I think culturally, when we look at it, I touched on this before, but things like, do we even need to get this agentic platform right now? The technology is moving so quickly. Should we just wait for our ERP system to roll this out? I think what some folks realize right now and what others do not is that the people that really invest in agentic technology now will be the winners in 5 years. Because we'll look back on this year, 2025, and we'll be like, this is the year that things changed. The reason being, it is such a force multiplier. If you could just have 600 extra employees on demand that are working 24/7 around the clock for you, but they're genius level IQ robots that love doing sales order entry, or they love doing invoice matching, or they love doing quoting or shipping notices, right? That's the only thing they care about, and they work around the clock. And your competitors, if they choose to say, hey, I'm just going to wait for the guy next door to do the same thing, this is not like ERPs where, we're building a database. This is fundamentally shifting the landscape of labor. Because if I'm a company that invests in agentic technology and I decide to onboard, this AI workforce to my company, I may be able to reduce my prices way lower than my competitors, eat up market share, and in 5 years, I'm not going to have any more competitors. I'm going to have just acquired them all for pennies on the dollar. And it's kind of scary, but it's also exciting for those ambitious manufacturing companies and wholesalers that want to tap into the AI workforce to really drive a competitive edge for their business. That's the first one. The second one that I think you might find interesting, having done ERP services and being in the implementation world yourself, is interacting with a new age technology like agents and your relational database management system or a hierarchical database or these older systems that the manufacturing system is used to is very hard, right? It's hard to connect a technology that has been developed in 2025 and a technology that has been developed in the late 1990s. And there's some interesting things that I can go into there if you think it's worth it about, what is it like for an agent to interact with the legacy IT system?
Makes sense. Yeah, we really need to innovate. That's absolutely right. So looking at you already touched briefly based on that, what kind of technologies besides AI, what do you think will be the most influential ones in shaping the future of manufacturing? And what does Endeavor fit in there? Yeah.
I'm a little bit biased, but I definitely think AI is going to be super important. When I kind of look towards it, I think there's a variety of technologies and cool things that I've seen in the realm of now people developing generative AI kind of world models for the realm of robotics, right? And I think there's this world of, for example, drones now being used in construction and crawling robots being used in inspections and asset management. And there's humanoid robots now, right, that are beginning to work in packaging and logistics. And a lot of them are being powered by and amplified by generative AI. To me, it's glaringly obvious that AI is going to be the centerpiece of this. It's the biggest macro trend that the industry has seen, and I could see things that we have been talking about for the last 5-6 years, like drones or even AR and VR, just being so much better now that we have a better understanding of the world around us. Because what that generative AI world model does is it allows us to take all the information about the factory floor or the warehouse and really understand it, that traditional software that was driving the robot or driving the AR VR program was not able to understand before. So I'm quite bullish on all the different sorts of technologies that are now going to be augmented by AI.
Yeah. Make full use of what's available, right? Yeah. Makes sense. I mean, you have been very successful now. So what kind of advice would you give to others who want to start their companies in the tech and manufacturing sector?
Yeah, it's a great question because despite kind of growing up around the industry, I'm not someone who spent most of their life in manufacturing, right? I'm not someone who's worked at a large manufacturer for 30 years and became the CIO of the company and is then starting the company. I'm someone who graduated college and was like, I really think that I can make a difference in this space. And part of that is humility on my part, a willingness to come and learn. I think the first thing is a lot of people in the Valley, Silicon Valley here, where I'm based out of, come into an industry and they come in with almost this attitude that's like, you know what, I have this attitude of first principles and I'm going to break the rules and do things that no one has done before. And that's why no one has succeeded in this space. And I'm going to do things that are very different. And, I think while that's admirable to think, I'm going to be different, I'm going to do things contrary to popular belief, I think there's an element of respect that has to go towards the people that are in the space, right? When we interact with CIOs and digital transformation folks who have been in the business for the last 20, 30 years, they know more about their business than we do. The reality is that what we can help them with is leverage agentic technology, but fundamentally, they are the ones that have a seat at the table. They know the problems that their business is facing. They want to help the business the most, and they have the most to gain, right? I'll give you an example. When one of our early customers, we were working with a VP level individual in their IT department. Over the course of the last year, that person has gotten promoted to a C-level position because of the work that we've been doing with them, where we have helped that company use AI and in particular begin their first ever usage of generative AI. And they have been able to gain so much by basically being a trailblazer in the organization. And if we came in and we said, hey, man, we don't need you and we know better than you and we know AI and you don't know, that would be wholly unsuccessful. I mean, most of these are partnerships, right? And that's our approach, which is an advice to folks coming in is be humble and try to work in a partnership model with most of the folks in the industry, because I know a thing or two.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that part. Yeah, it's very important indeed. Yeah, the partnership model especially, I believe, because you can benefit in both ways. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. And I'm sure you do a lot of that too in the systems integrating and services world as well, right?
Yeah, it's similar. Yeah. You just have to stay up, Don't lose touch to the ground. It's important. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what makes Endeavor's approach different from other companies using AI in manufacturing? There are a few out there. I've seen stuff coming from Germany even. How does it set you apart? What's the difference?
Yeah. When we think about AI, and we don't say this, to just boost ourselves, but it's largely if you were founded before 2024, 2025, it's very hard to be an AI company, a truly native AI company. Certainly, you can use AI features and incorporate them into your legacy architecture, right? If you're an ERP company, certainly you can take an OpenAI API or a Microsoft, Azure API and integrate it on top of your existing platform, right? So you can say, hey, we have a co-pilot and there's a chatbot that you can talk to, and it'll look at your maintenance manuals or your standard operating procedures or your documents. However, the problem that arises is that these applications are not natively architected for AI in mind, right? AI architecture and AI native architecture is fundamentally going to be different than an AI optimized architecture, where an AI optimized architecture is fundamentally going to be playing into the old world of things, the manual world, the world in which, workflow is sequential and requires people to intervene and verify and check things and do lookups. Whereas our architecture is fundamentally AI native. It is built for an AI to use, not for a person to use. There's obvious drawbacks to that, which is when you think about how people use it, it's like, yeah, our tool is not necessarily built for people to come in and use to make themselves go faster, but it is built to drive outcomes. When we're asked, how do you price? We say we price on outcomes. We price on, the number of sales documents that we automate or the number of ERP systems that we migrate from one system to the other, right? Or we price on the number of invoices that we reconcile. This is a fundamentally different way of thinking where we're not charging on a seat-based model or we're not charging on the number of applications because we don't accrue value like that. We only accrue value on our AI labor providing outcomes directly to the customer.
Makes sense. So closing the story, what would you like to give to our listeners about Endeavor and your vision for the future of manufacturing to round it all up?
The one thing I'll say is that the world is dramatically changing, right? I think this is probably obvious to you and I and a lot of folks out there, which is I was just talking to a gentleman who was C-level executive at one of the world's largest chemicals companies. And, he uses ChatGPT for advice on, how to talk to his kids about certain topics or, how to write an all hands email for his employees or how to go about having a difficult conversation with his partner, right? And there's all these very weird, interesting things where it's like, if you told someone 3 years ago, would you be talking to a website about your family business or how to talk to, a difficult conversation with your employees? We'd probably say no, right? We'd probably be like, what are you talking about? You're crazy. But this is the new normal, which is we interact with AI on such a deep basis where it's gradually becoming more and more intertwined with our lives. And the reality is that we shouldn't expect it to be any different in our professional lives as well, where if we are using AI so much in our personal lives, perhaps there is also a place for generative AI today in industry, right? Perhaps we don't need to wait 2 years before we use AI. Perhaps we can just take the jump and try it and use it out today. And a lot of that doesn't necessarily have to be FOMO. It can be FOMO that, the guy next door is going to start using it and hire a bunch of AI workers and, compress their prices and take on market share. But part of this is that there's tremendous benefits to it, right? We're talking about retaining employees. We're talking about providing a better experience to your customers, one that's touchless and fast. We're talking about making it easier to do business with your suppliers and reducing the errors in their processes. There's so many benefits that come from it. And part of this is by having a culture of experimentation and thinking forward about it. Because honestly, the way we think about it, there's not much downside to just using AI today.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Sahitya. Very, very good discussion today. Really appreciate your time and everything you could share with us. It's very valuable. I hope the audience will appreciate it as well. If you get any comments or any thoughts, please share them with us. We are glad to receive any kinds of feedback. All right. Sahitya, thank you very much. We'll keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
We will let you know. Peter, thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iot1.com.